Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Upon hearing this, Lin Li immediately snapped back to his senses and asked, "What did he say? Did he really not mention how we can break through this world and leave?" The most important issue at hand was how they could leave the world. It was no longer a magical domain in the general sense, but an incomparably real world that had the same perfect and balanced laws as Anral. According to Lin Li's thoughts, he would probably have to be at the peak of the sanctuary realm in order to break free from the restraint of the world laws and leave this world. However, Lin Li had only stepped into the sanctuary realm not long ago. It would take more than a day or two to reach the peak of the sanctuary realm. However, Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the others were obviously in disbelief when they heard Conorus' words. They did not know the history and origins of Conorus, and Osric was a mythical creature to them. Hence, they could not imagine it when they heard that Conorus had had a conversation with Osric before. Upon hearing Lin Li's question, Conorus shook his head and said, "I remember that, when Osric mentioned some things about this world, he was rather amazed by the power of the immortal king. The ability to create a world out of nothing, with one's individual strength is something that even he didn't have, let alone power to crack it. Indeed, creating a world was a power that only a god could possess, as it was already at the level of creation." Although Osric was the immortal king's proud disciple, and could be said to have received most of the immortal king's inheritance, the advancement through realms would still have to depend on one's enlightenment. He once told me rather emotionally that worlds created with one's individual strength are the ultimate form of magical domain, and the most important sign of a mortal's transformation into a god. Besides, the creator would be the god in the world that he had created. Once you enter his world, your life and death will be decided by him, and he can easily annihilate you with the power of the world. While speaking, Conorus looked at everything around him with emotion. Back then, he had only heard from Osric about the other worlds, but now that he had seen it with his own eyes, he couldn't help but be amazed by the immortal king's power despite having been an ancient demon deity. Magical domain. Is this world the ultimate form of the magical domain? To everyone else, that piece of information was simply unheard of. In particular, Archbishop Martin and Donald, who were mages at the peak of the legendary realm, had always thought that their magical domains had already reached an ultimate form. However, compared to this world, they were worlds apart. "Do we have to live in this world forever, like the aborigines of this world?" Canber questioned, feeling rather infuriated. He was still waiting to return to the Rotterdam kingdom to inherit the throne. How could he spend the rest of the world in this false world? Hasn't the immortal king already disappeared? Why is the world he created still here? Why didn't it collapse like the magical domain? Prince Jeremiah was not as anxious as Canber. In fact, he even thought that perhaps he could be like those heroes at the end of the Dark Age and lead the people to overthrow the High Elves. Hence, he was concerned about the reason for the prolonged existence of this world, and whether or not it would suddenly collapse at some point. It's like this world is just like those worlds in those spatial rifts in Anral. As long as the laws here are not unbalanced, it might really continue to exist, Archbishop Martin said, according to some of the things he understood. After all, in the doctrine of the Holy Light, there was indeed such a thing as the creation of worlds with holy light. Although he was a senior executive of the Brilliant Shrine, and he knew that most of the teachings were fabricated, he gave it some thought, and felt that perhaps Anral had really been created by some unimaginably powerful person. "Don't discuss those useless things, let's just think about how to get out of this hellhole now," Prince Canber urged again. He did not care about the realm and world at all. His key focus was to get out of here smoothly. In this hellhole, there was no throne waiting for him to inherit. Actually, Prince Canber was not the only one. It was the same for the others as well. No one was willing to spend the rest of their lives in a false world created by someone else. Even though this world was incredibly realistic and was almost the same as Anral, it still made them feel like they were livestock. However, leaving this place would definitely not be easy, just like leaving Anral. This place was a world with perfect laws, and one would probably have to possess the power to leave Anral in order to leave this world. The only thing that gave them hope was that the immortal king was no longer around. Hence, without the immortal king to maintain this world, there might be some loopholes after more than 1,000 years of evolution. After all, even in Anral, there were all sorts of spatial rifts. Hence, there might be some in this world. After a round of discussion, everyone decided to continue searching in this world, and maybe even try to mingle and blend in with the society in this world. Perhaps they might be able to find some clues related to a spatial rift. Although Lin Li was racing against time and Osric, he dared not recklessly barge into Alana City. Who knew what kind of strength the High Lord of this false world would have under the grooming of the immortal king? Hence, they'd better try to find out more before meeting him. After a discussion, Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the rest each returned to their teams to make targeted arrangements to guard against any unexpected situations that might arise in this strange world. Standing on the hill, Lin Li felt the gentle breeze brushing past his face as the scent of mud filled his nose. Deep down, he felt rather amazed and admired the immortal king's godly abilities. Despite knowing long ago that anything could happen in this world of magic, Lin Li still found the creation of a world with one's individual strength incredible. Since God wanted there to be light, there was light. That was the law of God, the power of creation that only a supreme ruler would have. In the past, Lin Li had thought that as long as he followed the proper procedure and increased his strength and realm step by step, it shouldn't be very difficult to reach the peak of the sanctuary realm. However, after seeing the immortal king's means, Lin Li clearly felt that he was truly worlds apart from the sanctuary realm's peak. Besides, Lin Li was thankful and glad that he had only been sent into the seven realm spiral when he first explored the sky castle back then. If he had been sent to this world that time, he and the others would probably have had to live here even if they had not got caught by the high elves. Of course, that also allowed Lin Li to have a clearer idea of the power of the peak of the sanctuary realm. He now had a clearer goal for his future. However, Lin Li had no room to consider the other matters for now. Getting out of this world created by the immortal king was the most urgent issue he had to consider now. Lin Li closed his eyes and made his mental strength penetrate that space. He carefully sensed the laws of the world in hopes of finding a way to resolve it. He was now also a sanctuary powerhouse. His understanding of the world laws was more than thorough. However, the more he understood, the more he realized how incredible it was to create a world. Space-time rifts were inevitable, even in the real Anral. Is the world created by the immortal king truly perfect? However, after a while, a look of disappointment appeared on Lin Li's face. After some careful analysis and comprehension, Lin Li had no choice but to face the truth. The nomological power of this world was extraordinarily dense and far more solid than that of Anral, which had lost the Tree of Eternity. He could even feel that he probably could not break through and leave this world even if he had reached the peak of the sanctuary realm. It seemed that he still had to think from another perspective. Lin Li pressed his forehead and felt that the situation he was facing now was really even more frustrating than facing countless magical traps. There was simply no way to get started. One wrong step could lead to his destruction. Ufalusi, did you find out anything useful from the High Elf? Where did the creatures here, including the High Elves, come from? Indeed, getting out of this place was a problem that they urgently had to consider now. However, Lin Li also had to consider how to ensure the safety of himself and the others. In this world, the greatest threat to the expedition were undoubtedly the High Elves, who still ruled over the various races. Lin Li already knew through the Ashen Warlock that the immortal king had the power to create life. Hence, were there any beings that had been created by the immortal king like the Ashen Warlock in the world that he created? In particular, from what that High Elf had told him, Osric was still the High Lord in this world. Lin Li did not think that any High Elf could replace Osric. If the Osric of this world, as well as other High Elves, was also created by the immortal king, the situation would truly be terrible. Lin Li had created the perfect body for the Ashen Warlock before, so he had a clear understanding of the power of perfect bodies. Besides, the Ashen Warlock was a living example. Although Lin Li was well aware of how precious the materials used to create the perfect body were, he was also clear of how psychotic the immortal king was. Perhaps the materials that were precious and rare to Lin Li were considered ordinary to the immortal king. If the immortal king had plenty of materials, there was no reason for him not to create a second or third Ashen Warlock, since he had already created one. Even with Lin Li's current strength, he did not dare to claim that he could contend with the Ashen Warlock. If there was a figure that was as powerful as Ashen Warlock in this world, they could just forget about leaving. The best choice would be to find a place to hide. Moreover, hiding would just allow them to barely survive. Lin Li was sure that the real Osric might not take long to gain full control of the Sky Castle. By then, the leader of the world would very likely be Osric. The people of the expedition would be subject to his control. Hence, be it to find a way out, or simply to survive, there would definitely be a battle between the expedition and the High Elves of this world sooner or later. Under such circumstances, Lin Li naturally wanted to know a little more about the High Elves of this world. In order to find out how strong the High Elves were, the first thing to do would be to find out their origins. Were they the remaining High Elves in Anral, who moved over during the Dark Age and treated the world as their last refuge? Or were they created by the immortal king and were born and bred in this world? If the High Elves believed that the world they lived in was the only world, it was very likely that they had been born and bred there. On the other hand, if they knew about the matters that happened at the end of the Dark Age, or if they knew that there was another Anral outside of this world, then they had to have come from Anral. Of course, There was definitely the chance that a prophet or something had suddenly come up with the theory that there was another world beyond this one instead. However, the chances of that were too slim. There was no need to think much about the humans and other races that had been enslaved, as they were likely to have been abducted by the Immortal King. It wasn't that the Immortal King wasn't capable of creating them, but capturing them was much easier than creating them. Even the Immortal King would not bother wasting his energy on slaves. Ufalusi recalled the memories he had obtained from that high elf's soul, and respectfully said to Lin Li, "Master, according to that high elf's memories, some of the high elves here had come to this world a long time ago. Some of the mages that used to work for Osric found this sky castle according to some of Osric's notes. At the end of the Dark Age, because they saw that the situation could not be salvaged, they moved into this world which they called their last refuge." Lin Li nodded, feeling somewhat relieved. In that case, the high elves were not created by the Immortal King, which meant that there basically would not be a powerful existence like the Ashen Warlock here. Although it was likely that some top-notch powerhouses had been born among the High Elves, after more than 1,300 years of rest and recuperation, it would not be easy to become as powerful as the Ashen Warlock. However, Lin Li frowned again, and asked, "What about the Osric here?" Not anyone could become Osric. The real Osric was the only High Elf who did not have the royal bloodline, but had obtained the title of a High Lord by relying on his incredible talent that was almost comparable to the Immortal King's. Lin Li did not believe that the Osric of this world was simply a clone of the real Osric. Even if he was, he would have to reach high standards in every aspect. If the phony Osric was exposed easily, the other High Elves of this world would not let him off, not to mention Lin Li and the others. The High Elves here all think that the Osric here is the real one, especially the ones in Osric's Magic Legion, who have joined at the end of the Dark Age. They believe that Osric's death back then was just an illusion, and that in reality, he had entered his last refuge to take on the mission of guiding the High Elves to their revival. Ufalusi said in a strange tone. It was rather difficult to verify the authenticity of the truth. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that they had only seen Osric's perfect body back in Osric's mausoleum. That seemed to be insufficient to prove that Osric was really dead. It's funny, isn't it? Initially, Lin Li was certain that the Osric outside was real, and the Osric inside was the double. However, after hearing the sudden piece of news, Lin Li was rather confused all of a sudden. After all, it seemed that no one knew whether Osric was alive or not. Even Angelano, who had been guarding Osric's mausoleum for more than 1,300 years, did not have a clear answer, let alone Conorus, who had been sealed in the hammer. Besides, from all kinds of information, all they could find out was that Osric had moved into the mausoleum he created for himself at the end when he became weaker. Could it be that Osric is still alive? However, what's with that ghost outside? Lin Li turned to look at Conorus, who was beside him, and then unnaturally said, "Conorus, what do you think of this problem? Did Osric mention anything else when he talked about this world back then?" The real Osric is indeed dead. His physical condition was so bad at the time that it could not be salvaged. He couldn't have hidden that from me. However, according to my understanding, the Osric in this world is not entirely just a substitute, said Conorus, who was not shocked by that news. Besides, he seemed to have known more about Osric too. What do you mean? Lin Li had a hunch about what Conorus meant, but he was in disbelief. Hence, he asked, could it be that the Osric here is just a projected avatar? If that's the case, how could he have enough power to suppress the other High Elves? Powerful existences all had the ability to create projected avatars, like the Lord of Darkness in the Abyss, which was the Dragon of Destruction as Artist projected avatar, as well as Elemental Dragon projected avatar with Xiao Hua, which belonged to the Emerald Dragon. Conorus, who had once been one of the ancient demon deities, had also created countless projected avatars that seemed to have spread across Anral to almost every corner of the world. However, such projected avatars were different from the Immortal King's creation, the Ashen Warlock. Every projected avatar would have to consume the power of the original body. It was just like pouring water from a bucket to cups. The more cups of water, the less water there would be left in the bucket. The more projected avatars, the more powerful the projected avatars, and the less power there would be left in the main body. Conorus had created countless projected avatars. As a result, the main body's power fell from that of a sanctuary realm ancient demon deity to the legendary level demon lord of the first several floors of the abyss. Hence, even a powerful existence that was close to a god would be extremely careful and conscientious when creating a projected avatar, as they did not want to waste a single morsel of power. Besides, in the creation of a projected avatar, one could not split their power into two. Other than the power consumed during the process, the projected avatar could have at most 10% of the power of the main body. Although Osric was powerful, the projected avatar would not be able to subdue the High Elves there even if they only had 10% of Osric's power. It's not a double. Osric once mentioned that creating a double is a power that even he cannot possess and a level that he will never be able to reach in this life. However, he did not feel dejected because of that. Instead, he seemed rather smug about it, Connors said slowly while recalling his memories. Smug? Was he smug because he had found a good teacher? Lin Li couldn't help but interject with a frown. Although he asked that question, he knew that given Osric's character, he probably would not be smug about the Immortal King. The things that Osric had done in the Immortal King's laboratory were not respectful to the Immortal King at all. No, he was just proud about having schemed against a supreme powerhouse like the Immortal King, Connors said as he looked at Alana City in the distance. Before Lin Li asked, he continued, although he admitted that he would never reach the level of the Immortal King with his talent and wits, and could never create an ultimate magical domain, he had successfully integrated a part of his consciousness into this world, and he would definitely master this power one day. This is hard to say. Osric here, despite having already predicted it beforehand, Connors' news gave Lin Li a great shock. If it were really like what Connors said, the situation of the expedition would probably be much more troublesome than he had expected. Osric's consciousness had descended in this world during the Dark Age, and it had been at least 1,300 years since then. With Osric's wit and the fact that he had gained a large portion of the Immortal King's inheritance, he was probably not far from controlling this world. That was definitely troublesome. Previously, Lin Li had some confidence in leaving this world because he thought that the Immortal King was no longer around. After all, no matter how strong the magical domain might be, it would truly be useless without a master. Even if they could not find any loopholes at the moment, they would at least not be in great danger in this world. However, there was now another Osric in this world, who was still part of the consciousness of the real Osric. After all these years, he had probably become a semi-owner of this world, right? Perhaps Osric still could, not compared to the Immortal King, but that did not mean that Osric, who had half of a home field advantage, would be easy to deal with. Lin Li still had no clue about how he could leave this world, and now he even learned that there was another big enemy here. He was at a loss as to how to deal with such a big problem. Although Lin Li had already stepped into the sanctuary realm, and had 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, external factors could barely affect realms. More importantly, in this world, the control crystal that Lin Li used to control the Sky Castle had already lost its effect. That meant that escaping would be impossible. At this moment, Archbishop Martin and Donald, who had made arrangements for their respective teams, once again went to Lin Li's side. Faced with this familiar yet unfamiliar world, they did not have many ideas. Since there are humans and other races in this world as well, should we try to contact them? They might have some underground rebellion forces. Since the ancestors of the Rotterdam had led the various races to overthrow the High Elves back then in Anril, we can do it again in this world as well. Prince Canber suddenly developed an idea, and wanted to replicate the events that happened at the end of the Dark Age, bringing about another war of resistance in this world. Although Canber had once again credited the overthrow of the High Elves to the ancestors of the Rotterdam Kingdom, the people around him were already familiar with the way the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom behaved, so they could not be bothered to argue with him. However, that undeniably seemed to be a feasible option. No matter what, the humans and other enslaved races in this world had also lived there for thousands of years. They ought to have some talents. Hence, Canber's words did not make the others feel disgusted. Instead, Archbishop Martin and the others were tempted. Master Flick, what do you think of this solution? Even if we can't find a way to leave at the moment, it would be a good thing if we can liberate the humans and other enslaved races in this world. Archbishop Martin asked Lin Li for his opinion. If possible, he would want to spread the doctrine of holy light here. However, Lin Li merely shook his head a little, and said to Ufalusi, tell them about the situation that you've understood. According to the memories in the soul of that High Elf, some of the humans and other races that were enslaved by the High Elves had indeed formed rebellion forces. However, since the remaining High Elves entered this world at the end of the Dark Age, they imposed stricter rules on the humans and other races. Not only did they strictly forbid the spread of magical knowledge, but they also implemented a policy of purging those who were likely to enter the legendary realm. So, we'd better not count on the people here, Ufalusi said calmly in a monotonous tone, explaining the situation of the humans and the High Elves in this world. Upon hearing his words, everyone understood that the lesson learned in Anril had caused the High Elves of this world to take a harsher approach in ruling over the humans and other races. Under such an oppressive rule, even if an individual like Garesco appeared amongst them, they would probably be killed by the High Elves before they could even grow. Canber glared at Ufalusi, who had opposed his idea before turning around and confidently saying to the rest, so what? They're just the High Elves who survived. The Immortal King won't be guarding them anymore, and they don't have the Sky Castle or the Tree of Eternity. I believe that with our power, It will be easy to get rid of them. Maybe we can be sent out when we exterminate all the high elves in this world. Of course, everyone knew that exterminating all of the high elves and being sent out of this world was just nonsense. However, they had no choice but to admit that a battle with the high elves would be inevitable. Even if they did not provoke the high elves would eventually discover them. A fight is definitely inevitable, but we have to carefully plan and figure out the strength of the high elves in this world. Archbishop Martin was rather conscientious. After all, the high elves in this world had developed for 1,000 years more than the high elves of Anral. No one knew how much their strength had developed. Although, like what Canber said, the high elves did not have any sky castle, and were nowhere near as strong as they had been in Anral. The expedition was also no match for the rebellion forces of that era. There were no sanctuary powerhouses, who were at the peak of the sanctuary realm, like Garesco and the 3 arbitrators to support them, either. Canber seemed somewhat contemptuous towards Archbishop Martin's conscientiousness. He frowned and said, "Archbishop Martin, you're being too careful. They're just some high elves who survived." "Well, then the Rotterdam Kingdom's team will fight at the front line while we go attack Alana City." Prince Jeremiah was already displeased with the bizarre sense of superiority that the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom had. Hearing what Canber had said about Archbishop Martin, he naturally retorted in a hostile manner. His ancestor merely got a high elven noble title through his wife. Now that the high elves dynasty is over, what's there to be proud of? What was the difference between fighting in the front and being cannon fodder? Although Canber was proud and arrogant, he was not as silly as to be cannon fodder. Hence, he was rendered speechless by Jeremiah's words. "Ufalusi, tell us about the state of the high elves' strength now." Lin Li ignored their argument, and instead got Ufalusi to tell Archbishop Martin and Donald about the situation. Capturing a high elf shortly after coming to this world was considered to be a relatively fortunate thing for the expedition. At least, they would not have to go around exploring and inspecting. After all, no one knew what kind of danger was hidden in this world, even though it was created based on Anral. Ufalusi had been sorting the information and memories that he had received from that high elf's soul. He was almost done now. Hence, after hearing Lin Li's instructions, Ufalusi immediately regurgitated all the information in detail without needing to think. The ruler of this world was undoubtedly High Lord Osric, and all of the high elves were united to form the Magic Legion, be it the ones who were the first to enter the Magic Legion, or the ones who entered at the end of the Dark Age. Although the size of the Magic Legion could not be compared to that of the real Osric and only had 400-odd members, the overall strength of the Magic Legion was better than before due to the additional 1,000 years of development. In fact, in the early days, there were more members in the Magic Legion, amounting to 700 to 800 members. However, the high elves would also age and die, and they had poor reproduction ability. Without the Tree of Eternity, their population had been decreasing. In fact, the high elves of Anral too had been suffering from poor reproductive abilities. Even without the war at the end of the Dark Age, given the high elves' reproductive abilities, the entire race would probably become extinct in a few thousand to 10,000 years. Besides, due to the extreme distrust they had towards the other races, the high elves in this world did not have armed forces other than the Magic Legion. It was unlike during the Dark Age, when there were at least some people who were trusted by the high elves, like Helios and the ancestors of the Rotterdam Kingdom. They were purely just slaves who lived even more miserably than the races in the Dark Age. Although they knew that the high elves in this world only had one Magic Legion, Evrion's face did not become less sullen. Prince Canber of the Rotterdam Kingdom was continuously clamoring about barging into Alana City. There were more than 400 members of the Magic Legion, and even the weakest one had legendary level abilities. There were more than 10 of them who were at the peak of the legendary level. That was much stronger than the expedition. Besides, the expedition was made up of 3 forces, hence, in terms of cooperation, they would definitely be inferior to the High Elves' Magic Legion. Perhaps they might even scheme against each other during the battle. Even if they ended up winning, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Lin Li did not tell them that the phony High Lord of this world might have a portion of Osric's willpower. Otherwise, their morale would have sunk to the bottom immediately. However, Lin Li was tempted at the thought of that phony High Lord of Alana City. How did High Lord Osric place his willpower in this world? Could it be that there are passageways to the outside world in Alana City? Even if there are none, Osric had researched for so many years, so he must have mastered many secrets about this world. Maybe one of the secrets is about leaving this place. Since most of the members of the High Elves' Magic Legion have been stationed in Alana City, should we leave this place first? After all, we've already caught a High Elf. They'll probably find out soon. After understanding the High Elf's strength, Donald looked at Alana City in the distance. He no longer had the arrogant attitude that was unique to the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Instead, he looked rather timid. Master Flick, What do you think? Archbishop Martin was clearly not as confident as before. How far can we go? This entire world is under the control of the High Elves. We definitely can't hide it for long. By then, we will have to face the endless pursuit of Osric and the Magic Legion. Lin Li shook his head and ignored Evrion's suggestion to run away. He was certain that with Osric's control over this world, they would definitely be caught no matter where they hid. If you want to stay and wait to die, you may go ahead yourself. We're not going to accompany you. Seeing that Lin Li had opposed his suggestion, Canber flew into a rage and turned around to leave. However, as soon as he turned around and took 2 steps, he discovered that Donald did not leave with him. Hence, he had no choice but to stop in his tracks again. Your Highness, please calm down. We can decide after hearing the insights that Master Philic has. Donald frantically pleaded with him. Although he also wanted to leave, he knew that Lin Li made sense. This world was ruled by High Elves, and there were no rebellion forces that they could use, either. Thus, where could they escape to? The best outcome would be that they would survive for a few days, before being annihilated by the High Elven Magic Legion while fleeing for their lives. What solution can he have? Can the Tower of Dusk barge into Alana City and kill all the High Elves? Canber's face was full of disdain, but he nonetheless gave Donald some face, and walked indignantly back to his original spot. Donald actually did not believe that Lin Li could have a good solution for the situation that they were facing. After all, the difference in power between them was too great. However, he knew that splitting up in this situation would only lead them to their own deaths. The Brilliant Shrine had clearly already stood on the Tower of Dusk's side, and would not leave with him. Hence, other than staying, he had no other option. After persuading Canber, Donald said to Lin Li with an apologetic expression, "President Philic, please don't be offended. His Highness is just a little eager. Since you don't wish to go into hiding for a while, you should have a better idea." "Yes, Master Philic, as long as you can get out of here, please feel free to state whatever you need for us to leave here. We'll definitely cooperate with you." Seeing Canber's behavior, Archbishop Martin was also afraid that Jeremiah would say something unpleasant, so he decided to ask Lin Li those questions. Lin Li looked at the people in front of him, and calmly said, "We'll fight. Now that the High Elves of Alana City have yet to prepare to fight against us, this is the only chance for us to get a head start. Otherwise, when the High Elves react, then we will forever be in a passive position, until we are completely wiped out." As soon as Lin Li said that word, everyone got a great shock and their hearts began to palpitate, but the reason that he gave them afterwards made them slip deep in thought. Indeed, the difference in strength between the two parties was very obvious, and if they were to openly fight against them, the expedition would undoubtedly be finished. Besides, the only advantage that the expedition had was the fact that the High Elves did not know of their existence. That was the only chance for them to shorten the gap. It was like a life-saving straw that they ought to put aside regardless of whether it was useful or not. However, if they did not try it, it would be useless. Another point was that although there were more than 400 members in the High Elves Magic Legion, some High Elves would definitely have to be assigned to various places to manage them in order to rule the world. It was impossible for them to leave the enslaved races alone. At this moment, the number of High Elves in Alana City should be considered rather small. If they waited until they were prepared, they would definitely gather all their forces to besiege the expedition. Hence, in comparison, the ones who took the initiative to attack would definitely have some hope of surviving. Having figured that out, they finally accepted Lin Li's suggestion. Of course, if they did not accept it, they would be at dead end. It was as if they were in the middle of 2 abysses, and one of them at least had a rope hanging from it. That was better than having no hope at all. Since we're going to launch a surprise attack, I think it's better for us to organize our team members and set off immediately. If we stay any longer, the disappearance of the High Elf will probably expose us. While speaking, Archbishop Martin looked at Donald. Actually, he was worried that 2 of theirs would spill the beans after getting caught. However, he still gave the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom some face. They had caught a High Elf, while the 2 bandits of the expedition had been caught by the High Elves. Everyone knew that they could not delay any longer. Hence, they stopped dwelling on that matter, and the senior members of the 3 forces finally reached an agreement. They decided to launch an assault on Alana City under Lin Li's instructions. Ufalusi remained on the ground and drew a diagram of the layout of Alana City that he obtained from the soul of the High Elf, especially Osric's palace and the layout of the Magic Legion's defenses. According to that information, the top executives of the 3 forces soon finalized the plan for the attack before heading back to their own teams continuously. Whether Osric knew about the appearance of the expedition would depend on his control over the world. Hence, Lin Li dared not guarantee that the assault would be successful, but as he wanted the teams of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom to follow him devotedly, he did not mention the issue. In fact, Lin Li believed that if he had more than 1,000 years to comprehend the world laws, he would probably be able to grasp most of them. What more an amazing figure like Osric? However, just like everyone else, Lin Li had no other choice. The rest took the attack as an opportunity, but he had to go regardless of whether there was a chance or not. According to the plan, the expedition followed an obscure route and headed towards Alana City. Fortunately, it was already late afternoon in this world, and it should be evening by the time they reached Alana City. Although the High Elves' combat power would not be affected in the night, it would at least be advantageous to them for the attack. As the team advanced, Lin Li also quietly unleashed his magical domain, which shrouded the entire team. The magical domain was not offensive, nor would it increase the team's battle power. In fact, it would not even make them feel a difference. The only effect was that through the mastery of the world laws, the team would temporarily be hidden. Although Lin Li felt that it was very likely that Osric had already detected the presence of the expedition, he was not willing to give up that other possibility. Perhaps the phony High Lord, who only had a portion of Osric's willpower, similarly had only a portion of Osric's wits. Finally, when night fell, the expedition had already arrived at a small hidden valley outside Alana City. The small valley should be the hidden spot that was the closest to Alana City. However, there were still several kilometers of bare land between the valley and Alana. Fortunately, according to the memories of the High Elf that had been captured, there were rarely any High Elves patrolling the city walls at night because the city had been safe for thousands of years. Actually, that was not strange. There were only a few hundred High Elves, while the humans and other races were completely treated as slaves. Under the purge policy, why would the High Elves bother to arrange patrols? In this world, the High Elves lived rather comfortably. Nothing could threaten their existence. The night did not completely conceal everything. Under the sky full of stars, the majestic Alana City looked even more beautiful and mysterious, giving off a dreamy vibe. Compared to Alana City here, the Alana City, which was the capital of the Felon Kingdom in Anral, was rather shabby. However, the expedition was not in the mood to appreciate the rare sight of the beautiful scenery. In their eyes, the beautiful Alana City was like a man-eating beast that made them feel fearful and nervous. From the information they had, they deduced that Osric was definitely in the palace of the city, and the magic legion under him was segregated into two. A portion of them was responsible for guarding the palace, while the other portion lived in the noble district outside the palace. That was also one of the reasons that the rest of the expedition had agreed to the assault. With good planning, it was entirely possible to kill the High Elves outside the palace with a blitz before charging into the palace. However, the premise was that the High Elves were really unprepared, and Lin Li was not optimistic about that. Hence, when discussing the assault, Lin Li overrode the plans of Archbishop Martin and the others who wanted to first kill the High Elves outside using some plausible reasons. He proposed to barge straight into the palace to kill the phony High Lord. To the others who did not know the background of the phony High Lord, there seemed to be no difference between the two plans in terms of difficulty. Hence, they did not insist. There was almost no defense put up by Alana City at night, perhaps because life in this world was indeed too comfortable. The expedition left the small valley, and they soon arrived below the city walls of Alana City, under the cover of Lin Li's magical domain. The members of the expedition were all above level 15, so the high walls did not have any effect on them. Even the Longma beasts the Holy Light Knights rode could leap over them. Lin Li used his mental strength to observe the situation in the city. After discovering that there was no sign of ambush, he waved his hand to signal the team to start entering the city. Under the cover of Lin Li's magical domain, the expedition did not make much of a commotion when they entered the city, but they were shielded by the distorted laws. They instantly climbed over the wall silently and arrived inside Alana City. The team continued to sneak around the city and fumbled towards the palace in the middle. They only stopped when they were a few hundred meters away from the square in front of the palace. At this moment, the metallurgists of the Rotterdam Kingdom began summoning their alchemy colossuses one after another. According to plan, the teams of the Tower of Dusk and Brilliant Shrine would be the main ones to attack the phony High Lord after entering the palace, while the Rotterdam Kingdom would guard the main road closely to block the High Elves that were coming from outside to support their enemy. Hence, if they waited until they entered the palace to summon the alchemy colossuses, it would clearly be too late. They could only summon the alchemy colossuses here before rushing in as fast as they could. However, when the expedition rushed into the square and was about to charge towards the palace gates, the luxurious gates suddenly opened slowly and automatically. Upon sight of that, they immediately stopped in the square and quickly assumed a defensive formation. At the same time, there were changes in the sky as well. The moon, which was initially emitting a soft glow, actually turned into a sun that was hovering in the sky. Night turned into day. Under the sunlight, The entire palace was gilded in a layer of gold. Amidst the striking ray of light, a tall and burly figure slowly walked out from the gate. When that figure completely emerged from the light, the expedition could not help but be reminded of the scrolls left behind from the Dark Age. They thought of High Lord Osric. Clearly, the expedition's assault had failed before it even began, and the appearance of High Lord Osric was enough to show that he had been in control of their operation. Although they knew that High Lord Osric in front of them now was just a phony, they still felt hopeless. The mana fluctuations that were emanating from Osric's body were extremely oppressive. They could tell that Osric was too powerful for them. With the appearance of High Lord Osric, multiple figures appeared in the surroundings of the square. They were all wearing a pharaoh robe and holding a dark moon staff. Clearly, they were all members of the Magic Legion and also emitted massive magical waves. All of them possessed legendary level power and above. After the members of the Magic Legion appeared, they did not immediately attack the expedition. Instead, they surrounded the square and glared at the members of the expedition with icy cold eyes, as if they were looking at sheep waiting to be slaughtered. "We're really finished this time." Facing the domineering high elves, even the powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary realm like Archbishop Martin and Donald felt their hearts sink. Lin Li, who was standing in front of the Tower of Dusk's team, kept a straight face. That situation was actually not beyond his expectations. If that had not happened, Lin Li would instead have wondered if Osric had another scheme. In the opinion of Archbishop Martin and Donald, the difference in strength between the expedition and high elves was worlds apart. It could not be made up for at all. If the sudden assault had been successful, there might be been some hope for them, but that bit of hope was clearly gone too. However, to Lin Li, the only thing that was truly troublesome, or rather the only thing that he had scruples about, was the phony Osric in front of him. Although the Magic Legion was strong, it did not pose a threat to him. He only called the people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom over to minimize the losses among his subordinates. The phony Osric looked at the members of the expedition, seemingly preparing to say something. However, Lin Li knew that he had to make the first move and suffer the consequences later. Hence, he did not wait for Osric to speak at all. Instead, he waved his hand, and a ray of lightning darted over. The target was not the phony Osric, but one of the high elves that was standing in midair in another direction. That high elf also had legendary level strength. He should be a leader of the Magic Legion. Although that Osric was an imposter, Lin Li could sense that the other party definitely had sanctuary level strength. Launching a sudden assault would be impossible. Hence, Lin Li chose that legendary level high elf as a target. He could at least decrease the burden on his men. If it was an ordinary magic spell, it was basically difficult to hurt a peak legendary level high elf with just one shot. However, Lin Li did not cast a magic spell. Instead, he shot out his Debris of the Stars, Thunderbolt. The Debris of the Stars contained terrifying power. After Lin Li entered the Sanctuary Realm, he did not get a chance to pair it with the Stars of Fury, but the power he could trigger was far beyond what he could in the past. Besides, the Debris of the Stars, Thunderbolt, was the sharpest of all 7 pieces of the Debris of the Stars. With the sharp attack of a sanctuary powerhouse, it was definitely not what most mages who were at the peak of the legendary realm could contend with. Everyone saw a ray of lightning flashing past, aiming for the leader of the High Elves, as well as a few High Elves behind them. Large holes appeared on their arms as they had been pierced rapidly. Kill them. Seeing this scene, the phony Osric was enraged. He was going to say something to insult them and call them lowly humans, but he did not expect the other party to be that despicable as to sneak up on his subordinates in front of him. Seeing that scene, everyone in the expedition, including Archbishop Martin and Donald, the powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary level, couldn't help but get the chills. They knew very well that the leader of the High Elves, who had been killed in an instant, had powerful strength that was not inferior to theirs. Would they be able to escape the strike of that rapid thunderous attack if it was them? Of course, as a partner, Lin Li's incredible strength should be a good thing for Archbishop Martin and the others. However, as a peak legendary powerhouse, they could not help but have complicated emotions. After all, in Anral, existences who were at the peak of the legendary realm were almost invincible. They even claimed to be able to compete with the sanctuary powerhouses. However, looking at the powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary realm, getting killed instantly, they felt dejected. It was better for Archbishop Martin. No matter what, Lin Li was the son of the Holy Light to him, so it could be considered family. Back then, the son of the Holy Light, Willin, had incredible strength, and even Apophis, one of the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council, had once lost to him. Hence, they felt that since Lin Li was similarly the son of the Holy Light, it should only be right for him to have the power to instantly exterminate a peak legendary powerhouse. However, to the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom, such as Donald and Canber, there was not only dejection, but also uncontrollable fear in their hearts at this point. Although they felt that the attacks were powerful because of a magical weapon, perhaps only legendary weapons would be able to instantly kill a legendary powerhouse, who was at the peak of the legendary realm. Despite being in a desperate situation, a look of greed formed in Donald's and Canber's eyes. Although they were a chief imperial mage and a potential inheritor of the king's throne, respectively, and had seen countless good things, including many of the best magical weapons that were claimed to be artifacts, they were still amazed. Everyone knew that those that they had seen were actually only semi-artifacts. In the history of Anral, there were perhaps only 5 or less magical weapons that could be called artifacts, with the most famous one being the one that the immortal king had once used to kill the dragon of destruction as Ardis. However, there was no detailed description of that weapon in the history records or the legends. Hence, until now, no one could explain clearly what the weapon used by the immortal king was like. It was basically a legend. Besides, they also had the Book of Eternity that was created by Garesco using the leaves of the Tree of Eternity, as well as the Moonlight Scepter of the High Elven Queen. They could be considered artifacts in the eyes of everyone in the world. Donald and Canber believed that the weapon that Lin Li had just used was at least better than the so-called semi-artifacts that they had seen, even though it had yet to reach the level of a legendary level artifact, as it managed to kill a peak legendary powerhouse immediately. However, Donald and Canber were sure that it was not the time for them to have those thoughts now. Since Lin Li could instantly kill a peak legendary powerhouse, he could kill them too. Besides, they were now going to face a huge crisis together. Hence, as soon as they felt greed, they quickly hid it in their hearts, not revealing a single bit of it. President Flick, the secret assault has failed. Leave the matters of those high elves to us. I hope that you can try to buy some time and hold Osric back. We'll take care of them as soon as possible and aid you. Donald hurriedly declared their new battle plan after seeing that Osric had flown into a range, and an intense battle was about to begin soon. Although he did not dare to show his greed for the artifact, Donald still couldn't help but be tempted. He simply made Lin Li deal with the phony High Lord alone. Of course, he thought that Lin Li would not be killed by the phony High Lord quickly since he had that artifact. The motive of that was to squeeze out more energy to deal with those high elves while hoping that the fake High Lord could use up more energy of Lin Li's artifact. It would be even better if both of them suffered serious injuries. Although Donald had never seen a real artifact before, he knew that its user would suffer huge consequences if he didn't have the level of abilities that matched that of the artifact. For example, while the magical crystal cannon was very powerful, its consumption of magical crystals was also immense. Donald didn't believe that a 20-year-old like Lin Li could use that artifact endlessly, releasing the terrifying power that could kill a powerhouse at the peak of legendary level in a flash. Moreover, Lin Li didn't choose to attack that fake High Lord before this. Instead, he chose to attack that High Elven leader from another direction. This just made Donald more certain of his guess. If the usage of that artifact was limitless, why not attack the fake High Lord first? Obviously, it was to save a chance of using the artifact. Just a moment before the start of the battle, Donald wasn't worried about others having differing opinions about his battle strategy anymore. This was because the High Elves had rushed towards them before they could continue to discuss anything else. Moreover, Donald didn't give Lin Li any time to respond. He led his men towards the High Elves immediately after he had finished his sentence. How could Lin Li not guess Donald's intentions? Since he needed those Rotterdam people to act as cannon fodder, he couldn't be bothered to deal with Donald. Actually, Lin Li had intended to face Osric himself in the first place even without Donald's tricks. That would be a fight between kings. In Anral, it was often said that the power of a powerhouse at the peak of legendary realm could match that of a sanctuary powerhouse. However, once Lin Li had truly reached sanctuary realm and understood more about its powers, he realized that peak of legendary realm powerhouses were like ants to sanctuary powerhouses. Thus, if Lin Li went for the High Elves' Magic Legion from the start and left the fake High Lord for the others in the expedition to deal with, the end result would still be similar. Lin Li would annihilate the Magic Legion, while not many in the expedition team would be able to survive. As such, it would still be a battle between Lin Li and Osric. Lin Li didn't really care about whether those from the Rotterdam and the Brilliant Shrine would be dead or alive at the end of the battle. After all, he had planned to use them as cannon fodder in the first place. However, he didn't want to exhaust his own troops from the Tower of Dusk, since he had brought out the majority of the elite forces of the Tower of Dusk for this expedition. If they perished just like that, it would be detrimental to the Tower of Dusk. Thus, Lin Li intended to attack the fake High Lord himself regardless of whether the sneak attack was successful or not. He chose to kill the High Elves commander first because he knew that this move might not work on the fake High Lord, given that he still had some of the real Osric's will. The other reason was to completely enrage the fake High Lord so that he would only attack Lin Li. The fake Osric was still Osric. If Lin Li destroyed all his subordinates within seconds, it would undoubtedly be a slap on Osric's face. Although Lin Li probably couldn't prevent it if Osric had wanted to slaughter everyone on the spot given his powers, how would the proud Osric copy Lin Li's actions? If Lin Li did just that, it was more likely that the sadistic Osric would leave Lin Li for the last to deal with so that he would see his teammates getting killed one by one. After all, the true Osric had done this many times, when clamping down the opposition forces in the Dark Age. Indeed, after Osric announced the start of the battle, he didn't even look at any of the expedition team members, and pointed his magic staff right at Lin Li. The enormous gem at the tip of the staff erupted with a blinding glow. A flame dragon appeared and pounced on Lin Li with astounding speed. Lin Li shot up towards the sky without caring about those expedition team members behind him. It might seem like he was trying to avoid the flame dragon's attack without caring about his comrades' lives, but in fact it wasn't because Lin Li was cruel, but rather that he didn't need to care about that. Not only did the fake High Lord possess sanctuary realm power, his understanding of world rules was vastly superior to that of Lin Li. Thus, the edge Lin Li had over Osric, other than the 7 pieces of debris of the stars, was his understanding of Osric's personality. Osric, on the other hand, knew nothing about Lin Li. Seeing that the flame dragon was almost reaching the expedition, Osric flung his magic staff slightly, and the flame dragon changed its direction immediately towards where Lin Li was. Next, Osric's body disappeared from where he was, and instantly appeared opposite Lin Li. The flame dragon had already flown near Lin Li by then, its scorching flames almost distorting the space. Lin Li didn't appear to be anxious at all. He pointed his Helios scepter at a point just beside the flame dragon relaxedly, and a roaring river appeared in the midair. This river was like a water snake, even bigger than the flame dragon in size, wrapping tightly around the flame dragon. Within moments, both the river and the dragon disappeared, leaving behind a thick cloud of vapor. Intruder, you've successfully gotten my attention. It seems like you're very confident in your skills. The rage on Osric's face had disappeared. Evidently, he had seen through Lin Li's trick. However, geniuses were all stubborn. Judging by Osric's personality, he couldn't touch the expedition before he had crushed Lin Li under his feet, since he didn't see the expedition and Lin Li as true opponents at all. When Osric was speaking, the cloud of vapor had disappeared. However, Lin Li wasn't interested in talking to Osric. The Helios scepter shone again, and a light and darkness sword slashed towards Osric. The light and darkness sword wasn't condensed beforehand. Instead, it was turned from virtual to concrete during the time Lin Li was slashing it down. The purest power of light and darkness tore the space apart as it landed on Osric's head. The entire space became monochromatic. An ordinary person wouldn't need to be struck by the light and darkness sword, for the extreme conflicting auras would be enough to split his soul in half. The power of the sword was much higher now compared to the one that had torn Steven's magical domain apart. A peak of legendary realm powerhouse would probably find it hard to resist such a blow. However, Osric didn't even flinch at this attack. He also didn't appear to be mad that his opponent didn't answer his question. Instead, he lifted his magic staff to counter the light and darkness sword. When the two weapons met, it seemed like time had stopped at that very moment. A soft glow radiated from the tip of the magic staff and penetrated the sword body of the light and darkness sword effortlessly. Next, the concrete light and darkness sword dissolved into stardust like sand being blown away by wind. Lin Li's expression changed upon seeing this. Although the fake Osric was only around level 26 or 27, and still quite far from reaching the peak of Sanctuary Realm, his understanding of world rules was way above Lin Li's. With such knowledge, this fake Osric could be considered half a ruler of this world. To a certain extent, he could apply the powers only a powerhouse at the peak of Sanctuary Realm could. The merging of light and darkness in the light and darkness sword was a usage of world rules. However, the fake Osric had used the same understanding of world rules to dissolve its nomological power, causing the powers of light and darkness to break free from Lin Li's control and return to their fundamental nanomigic form. The only good thing was that the fake Osric seemed like he hadn't reached the stage where he could fully control the world rules. If not, all the rules would repel Lin Li once Osric had given his orders. Lin Li would turn into an ordinary human, and wouldn't be able to release even a small fireball. The combination of light and darkness, interesting power. After dissolving Lin Li's light and darkness sword, Osric didn't retract his magic staff. Instead, his lips rose mockingly. Next, the gemstone at the tip of this magic staff shone again. A more gigantic and concrete light and darkness sword appeared, clashing towards Lin Li's head while tearing the space above it apart. Unfortunately, Lin Li wasn't Osric. He couldn't dissolve the powers of light and darkness so easily. When facing this sword that could tear apart space, Lin Li could only activate his space robe he was wearing, and transport himself to another position, barely escaping the earth-shattering blow. Immediately after Lin Li's body appeared on the other side, he pointed his Helios scepter at Osric. Strikes of thunderbolts the thickness of a water bucket rolled towards Osric. Lin Li didn't use the debris of the stars, but his understanding of thunderbolt alone was enough for every strike of thunderbolts to be able to crush a small hill. However, such tremendous force didn't even hurt Osric an inch after landing on his body. It was like a breeze passing through his body. Damn it, void of the stars. Lin Li was rather familiar with what Osric was doing now. Back in the Black Stone Mountains, he had witnessed the god of mages Garesko use such magic via the Spastime beacon spell. With the void of the stars, the caster could place their body and soul into nothingness and be immune to any magic or physical harm from the mortal world. Clearly, the real power of the fake Osric was insufficient for him to cast the void of the stars. However, with his understanding of world rules and the power of half a ruler of this world, he seemed to have cast the spell with greater ease than Garesko. As the strikes of thunderbolts passed through Osric harmlessly, the mocking expression on his face didn't disappear. Such attacks weren't even considered a scratch to him. After seeing Garesko cast the void of the stars, Lin Li had thought more than once that someday he would be able to stand calmly at the center of a massive magic storm, witnessing all sorts of magic passing through his body harmlessly. However, when it was his opponent using the void of the stars, Lin Li couldn't stay calm. There were two types of opponents that were the most nerve-wracking and appalling. One was those who wouldn't die no matter how many times you attacked them, and the other was those you wouldn't be able to attack no matter what you did. Opponents that wouldn't die could at least be sealed off somehow, but those that he couldn't attack were the worst. Looking at Osric's face, that would warrant a good whacking, Lin Li felt very annoyed. Though his attacks didn't stop, however, at least Lin Li managed to prove one thing: Osric's understanding of world rules was insufficient to prevent Lin Li from casting his spells normally. If it was another person, Lin Li would still doubt whether that was another trick down his sleeve. But with Osric's pride, even the fake Osric wouldn't bring himself to such a low level as to use trickery on an opponent who had just entered the sanctuary realm. Enveloped by thunderbolts and with his body and soul placed in nothingness, Osric held up his magic staff again. With a little recitation, the entire space shook violently, and the thunderbolts that Lin Li had cast vanished instantly as if faced with unbearable pressure. Lin Li didn't panic. His Helios scepter disappeared and was replaced by two pieces of debris of the stars, Holy Light and Gloomy Dark. Although Lin Li possessed 7 pieces of debris of the stars, his grasp of Holy Light and Gloomy Dark was much stronger than the rest's. When facing a strong opponent like Osric, Lin Li couldn't afford to test the other pieces of debris of the stars, and thus chose to use those that he could release the most power with. With the appearance of Holy Light and Gloomy Dark, Lin Li recited a string of notes rapidly. Nobody knew what language he was reciting in, as it seemed like a string of meaningless syllables. However, the recitation was filled with a sense of sacredness and solemnness. The sky, which had been forcefully turned into day by Osric, reverted to night sky, not with night with dark clouds, but complete darkness. At the same time, solemn bells sounded from unknown location, each sound causing a ripple through the air. Seeing this situation, the mocking expression on Osric's face disappeared, and he turned more solemn. With his understanding of world rules, Osric could feel the immense power the magic contained with greater clarity than others. Meanwhile, when the bells sounded, Archbishop Martin, who was battling one of the High Elven commanders, shot a glance towards the sky. That one look made Martin stunned, almost forgetting that he was facing an opponent who was equally strong as himself. If not for the prompt rescue of those around him, Archbishop Martin might have been killed at that moment just like that. Even so, he couldn't quite concentrate on his battle after recovering from his stunned state, sinking into a passive position in the battle. Everyone found Martin's change in behavior very strange. Even his opponent, the High Elven commander, didn't know what he was thinking. No one knew that it was looking into the sky that stirred up a storm in his heart. Infinite darkness, solemn bells ring the end of all evil. The whole world will expect its last judgment. This line from an old record appeared in Archbishop Martin's mind. What it described was the scene where the gods were passing a judgment on the world. To others, this might only be a legend, as he was one of the 4 archbishops of the Brilliant Shrine, who was second only to the Pope. However, the significance of this line was much more than a legend. This also meant that the Sanctuary Realm spell, Judgment Day, could only be cast when one had grasped the ultimate power of light and darkness. Archbishop Martin wasn't surprised that Lin Li could grasp the power of light to its maximum, since he already saw Lin Li as the son of the Holy Light. However, he was very shocked to know that Lin Li's grasp of the power of darkness was so strong. Could it be that he was not only the son of the holy light proclaimed by the brilliant shrine, but also the darkness incarnate in the legends of the darkness shrine? Although Archbishop Martin knew the relationship between light and darkness, he still couldn't accept such a speculation at that moment. In reality, Archbishop Martin himself could use some dark magic. The sanctuary powerhouse Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine even had a high level of expertise in dark magic. It wasn't a taboo for the chiefs of the Brilliant Shrine to use dark magic. However, the son of the holy light meant a person who possessed the purest quality of light intrinsically. This person had extremely strong control over the power of light, while the darkness incarnate was the complete opposite. Light and darkness shared a relationship of coexistence. However, if the embodiment of light and darkness would result in an ordinary human, and an ordinary man could learn holy light magic or dark magic, it would be very hard for him to reach the heights of either the son of the holy light or the darkness incarnate. However, since Lin Li had cast the legendary Judgment Day magic spell, evidently his grasp of both the powers of light and darkness had reached their maximum levels. Martin didn't believe that Lin Li was just an ordinary human. He seemed more like a combination of the son of the holy light and the darkness incarnate, yet these two should result in mediocrity when combined. Of course, Martin wouldn't know that Lin Li could cast Judgment Day only because he had holy light and gloomy dark. This was why Archbishop Martin seemed to have entered a strange reasoning loop and couldn't get out of it. Other than Archbishop Martin, the others didn't know about these secrets regarding the Brilliance and Darkness shrines. Thus, they didn't have any strong reactions to Lin Li casting Judgment Day. Even so, the pressurizing aura it had given out was enough to show how powerful this magic was. However, since everyone was more concerned about their own opponents that could take their lives, they couldn't afford to give their attention to other things. The area that Judgment Day loomed over was different from that covered by dark clouds, or from natural darkness. It was like nothing existed in that space, and the sky turned into a darkness of nothingness. The solemn bells still reverberated in the air. The world seemed to be shaking together with the sound of the bells, waiting for the final judgment of an omnipotent God. Suddenly, a crack was torn in the dark sky, and a pure beam of light shot out directly from that crack. The surroundings were filled with the holy aura of the angels of light, crashing down on Osric while overwhelming the world with the most sincere prayers. Even the true Osric might not be able to withstand much immense judgment of light. It was then that the fake Osric had to take Lin Li's power seriously. In face of the judgment of light, Osric chanted a quick spell, and his magic staff shone continuously. With Osric's chanting, large amounts of magical elements around him swarmed out, and the power of four elements concentrated together, forming an enormous four-colored storm. Snakes of fire and thunderbolts surrounded the storm. The immense power seemed to be tearing the space down. Even the judgment of light seemed to flicker, almost as if it would be engulfed by the elemental storm. Boom! The deafening sound erupted as the judgment of light finally struck the elemental storm. The countless angels of light surrounding the judgment of light were torn into shreds under the storm. On the other hand, the power of the elemental storm was also weakened under the judgment of light. Osric, who was in the epicenter of the elemental storm, continued chanting the spell, concentrating more elemental power. On the other side, Lin Li was also putting in his all to inject more power of light and darkness into the judgment of light, making it rain down continuously from the sky. In the sky, two sanctuary powerhouses clashed violently with earth-shaking intensity. On the ground, the battle between the expedition and the High Elven Magic Legion also reached its climax. The High Elven Magic Legion had about 300 members there, each with at least legendary level power. For these high elves, there wasn't a distinction between a mage or a warrior. Every high elf was both a mage and a warrior. Although that didn't mean that a high elf's power could match that of two humans of the same level, it was enough for them to have a clear edge against a human of the same level. If Lin Li hadn't killed off one of the High Elves' commanders at the very start, it would have been impossible for the expedition to hang on till now. Even so, the expedition was in a dangerous position now. After all, not everyone in the expedition had reached legendary level. Most of them were only level 18 or 19. Although it was very close to reaching legendary level, the difference between that and a true legendary powerhouse was still immense. Everyone in Anral knew that the Rotterdam's alchemy colossuses could match a legendary powerhouse in power, but looking at them now, they served only as targets for the High Elves and dispersed a bit of pressure for their companions. Did it seem even a little like one of them could match a legendary powerhouse? One could foresee that even if the expedition won in the end, those alchemy colossuses would have to undergo major overhaul. The Brilliant Shrine's side seemed better. With the Holy Light battle song on top of their heads, the Holy Light Knights managed to put up a strong defense, while the Brilliance Priests cooperated very well. As long as the equilibrium on the battlefield wasn't disturbed, the team could endure for hours. More importantly, the Brilliant Shrine could get a bit of the Tower of Dusk's help. Although Lin Li had intended for the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam to serve as cannon fodder, they still had to die reflecting their value. If the cannon fodder was easily destroyed by the High Elves, then the Tower of Dusk would have to face the entire Magic Legion alone. The strength of the Tower of Dusk was that it had many high-level powerhouses. Connorus, Ufalusi, and Norfaler were all legendary powerhouses at the peak of level 24. Connorus, who possessed a perfect body, could match 2 peak of legendary realm high elves alone. Although the Tower of Dusk's team of mages didn't have many legendary powerhouses, the net array concentrated their power, be it attack or defense. Their collective power was no worse than a true peak of legendary realm powerhouse. For the Death Knight Legion that possessed divine power, half of them had stepped into legendary realm after the battle that destroyed the double realm psychic towers and became Retribution Knights. Thus, the power of their infinite kill formation was more frightening now. If they were all Retribution Knights, it would be sufficient to match half of the Magic Legion. The battle in the sky was more intense, but the battle on the ground entailed more casualties. Be it the expedition or the High Elves, death was inevitable. A life was lost at almost every moment of the battle. Broken arms, fresh blood. As the battlefield grew in size, the entire Alana city gradually turned into a disastrous scene. Suddenly, the loud sounds in the sky disappeared. What vanished together with that was the sky of darkness. Bright sunlight shone on Alana once again. Although nobody in the expedition stopped or even looked at the sky, Evrion's heart sank. Could it be that the young president of Tower of Dusk didn't manage to defeat Osric after all? Be it the Brilliant Shrine, or those from the Rotterdam, no one believed that Lin Li would be able to kill Osric in such a short amount of time. Thus, the result could only be otherwise. Thinking about the other possibility, the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam both felt cold sweat on their palms. The expedition was already struggling to withstand the attack from the Magic Legion now. If Osric were to join in, the team might not even be able to survive a blow. Only those from the Tower of Dusk appeared relatively calm, be it the higher-ups or the normal mages. After all, the team of mages all knew that the president was a sanctuary powerhouse. Even if he couldn't kill Osric, it was impossible for him to be killed now. For the higher-ups, it was even clearer. If Ufalusi and Norfaler were okay, then Lin Li was definitely fine too, since they shared soul contracts. In the sky, Lin Li clenched holy light and gloomy dark tightly in his hands. He was panting slightly and staring at Osric, who was not far away. The elemental storm surrounding Osric had disappeared now, but he still looked the same as before with an expression of ease. Lin Li knew clearly that Osric wasn't faking this air of ease. Although he had given his all to activate the full power of holy light and gloomy dark, Osric had used the power of the world that the Immortal King had created. It could be said that Lin Li was fighting with the Immortal King, and Osric was only a middleman. As such, he suffered very little impact from the collision just now. It was not the case for Lin Li. Although the majority of the power of Judgment Day came from holy light and gloomy dark, the mental strength exhausted was Lin Li's. In addition, it was precisely because the power didn't belong to him that he had to use up more mental strength to cast Judgment Day. Although Lin Li's mental strength could be considered limitless, nothing was truly limitless in this world. The Judgment Day alone had used up half of his mental strength. The fact that a spell used up half of one's mental strength but didn't cause much substantial harm to the opponent would upset any person. However, there was only some fatigue on Lin Li's face, not anxiety. Since I've entered this world, you're the first human that got my attention. If you submit to me, I can forgive all your previous offenses and bestow large areas of land upon you. Osric didn't attack immediately, but surprisingly wanted to solicit Lin Li. During the Dark Age, Osric was a well-known racist. He had always thought races other than the High Elves to be inferior, and fit only to serve as the High Elves' slaves. The elven Helios Halesis Dalisma, and that human royal from the Rotterdam, who had gotten to where he was because of his wife, all had many grudges against Osric. If not for the suppression of the High Elven Queen Ashara, Osric would have killed them personally. Moreover, at the end of the Dark Age, humans were the main force in the that overthrew the High Elvis rule. The extinction of the High Elves could be attributed to the massacre the humans conducted. Thus, it could be said that the only way to resolve the hatred between the two races was for one of them to perish. This was why Lin Li didn't manage to respond when Osric tried to solicit him. However, a cold sneer appeared on Lin Li's face soon after. With a tinge of mockery, he replied, "You're just a counterfeit. What right do you have to ask me to submit to you? What are you saying?" Upon hearing his opponent call him a counterfeit, Osric's eyes shot out a murderous glare. Immense pressure oozed out of him, and the space seemed to freeze. However, Lin Li seemed not to feel anything. He disdainfully continued, your memories, your existence, everything about you is fake. You're just a pitiful worm that the real Osric has reared. One day you will become nutrients for his revival. You tell me what right you have to ask me to submit to you." As Lin Li finished his words, he felt an abnormal magic fluctuation in front of him. He immediately activated Holy Light, and a gigantic light shield was formed. Next, following a loud bam, an enormous pressure swarmed towards him against his shield. He was forced to retreat like a bullet shot. Evidently, Lin Li's words had completely enraged Osric. Although this was just a fake Osric, he had the same pride as the real one. "You will pay for your words." Osric's body flashed, and he immediately caught up with Lin Li. As a brilliance erupted from his magic staff, another string of powerful magic shot towards Lin Li like a thunderstorm. Light and darkness alternated on Lin Li's body. Utilizing both the power of holy light and gloomy dark, Lin Li was able to put up multiple layers of defense to withstand Osric's crazy attacks. Lin Li almost didn't stop anywhere. He was like a bouncing ball, flying everywhere in the sky under these crazy magic spells. However, Lin Li didn't stop with his nasty words. Under all the loud collisions, Osric could still hear his mocking voice. "Too bad. You're far below the real Osric. Your abilities are like a pile of dog shit. Once the real Osric has completely awakened, your ending will be to become his nutrients. You aren't even considered his slave." How pitiful. Osric didn't respond to Lin Li's words, but his magic attacks became more violent. With the immortal king, Osric was the true ruler of this world, the true god. All the power in this world was owned by him. Unless the world collapsed, his mana would never be exhausted. Osric wasn't a person who would lose the clarity of his mind easily. However, Lin Li's words were like a sharp knife stabbing into his heart continuously. With his pride, how could he accept the fact that he was just a counterfeit that was created to be the nutrients of another? In fact, Lin Li had said all these things because of his understanding of Osric's personality. Even if this was just a portion of Osric's will, the immense pride and arrogance of the fake Osric was still the same. In this world, this part of Osric's will hadn't had any interaction with the original body for over 1,000 years. How could it not produce its own will? He probably couldn't accept the fact that his entire existence was for the sake of someone else. Under Osric's frantic attacks, Lin Li, who had been flying everywhere, suddenly stilled. The light and darkness on his body increased in intensity exponentially, and he shouted, "Enough, you should rest now." Of course, Osric wouldn't stop his attack just because of Lin Li's words. However, he realized that he had lost connection to this world totally when he tried to cast his spells again. To make matters worse, not only had he lost this grasp of world rules, he couldn't even communicate with the magical elements anymore. As the magic storm stopped, Lin Li's body was revealed, and he stared at Osric, who was forced to stop his attack. Lin Li heaved a sigh of relief. His judgment was indeed right. Just then, strange items floated in the air around Osric. The items included a translucent spear, a little tree branch with young leaves, a block of light blue ice cube, a red flame, and a sharp arrow sizzling with electricity. These items, together with the white sphere and black sphere in Lin Li's hands, were the 7 pieces of debris of the stars: nothingness, rebirth, polar snow, raging flames, thunderbolt, holy light, and gloomy dark. These 7 pieces were connected by Lin Li's mental strength and arranged into a magic array that was unseen in this world. Rather, this couldn't even be considered a magic array, as it didn't possess any element of that. Its power was derived from a communication with Lin Li's mental strength, diffusing seamlessly into one and creating a space relatively independent from this world. The 7 pieces of debris of the stars used to be the immortal king's weapons. Lin Li had wondered what kind of connection there was between the basic rules the immortal king had used to create this world and the rules in the 7 pieces of debris of the stars. In the battle earlier, be it the light and darkness sword or judgment day, they were all Lin Li experimenting to test his hypothesis. Through these experiments, Lin Li finally realized that world rules the immortal king had used to create this world were the same as those of the 7 pieces of debris of the stars. Thus, the 7 pieces of debris of the stars were the origin of this world, and their power was the origin force. Although Lin Li couldn't control the whole world that the immortal king had created through the 7 pieces of debris of the stars, he could make others lose control of it. However, he couldn't release the 7 pieces of debris of the stars just like that, or Osric would snatch them away. He could only seize the opportunity that he was being thrown in all directions by Osric's attacks to infuse the pieces of debris of the stars into the world rules. He could do that because the world rules were based on the rules in the 7 pieces of debris of the stars. Thus, infusing them into the world rules couldn't get the attention of even Osric. Finally, after everything was arranged in position, Lin Li activated the powers of all 7 pieces, forming a space that completely annulled the world rules. In this space with no world rules, even the simplest magic could not be cast, not to mention Osric's magic, that made use of world rules directly. At the same time, as the 7 pieces of debris of the stars were controlled by Lin Li, he wasn't affected very much by this nullification of world rules. Even though Osric had lost all his powers in this space, the space that the 7 pieces of debris of the stars had constructed already had the basic shape of a world, but it still relied more on the power of this world. If he had left his world, Lin Li wouldn't be able to construct such a space with his current abilities. Who are you exactly? Why do you have these? Osric was the Immortal King's student, so he was familiar with the weapons his teacher had used before. However, Lin Li didn't answer Osric. Holy light and gloomy dark flew out of his hand. Under the control of Lin Li's mental strength, the powers of 7 pieces of debris of the stars were released simultaneously, shooting towards Osric. Without any agonizing shriek, Osric's body disintegrated in a flash, turning into the most fundamental nanoform. As Osric was dying, a bright spot suddenly escaped from the powers of the 7 pieces of debris of the stars, preparing to escape in some direction. Lin Li was very well aware of what was going on in this space he had constructed, and immediately pinpointed that escaping light spot. Without any hesitation, Lin Li's mental strength formed a huge net, trapping that light spot in and dragging it into his own mental space. Once that light spot had entered, Lin Li immediately felt an immense amount of information flooding his brain. It was the same feeling as when he had first got the Sky Castle's control crystal. The majority of the information was actually the large amount of experience Osric had gathered in the 1,000-odd years, as well as many secrets of this world. When he had first put part of his, here, Osric probably didn't expect all his efforts to end up benefiting someone else. After absorbing most of the information from that light spot, Lin Li had a much clearer understanding of the ultimate domain, the world. Although Lin Li's current abilities were insufficient to create his own ultimate domain world, he was able to create a magical domain more powerful than most sanctuary powerhouses after absorbing the information. In addition, as this world that the Immortal King had created was built upon the rules of the 7 pieces of debris of the stars, Lin Li's control over the pieces reached a new height after absorbing the said information. However, now wasn't the time to parse all this information. Although Osric had been killed, the battle in Alana was still ongoing. In face of the crazy attacks from the High Elven Magic Legion, the expedition was in a crisis now. While Lin Li didn't care about the life and death of those from the Brilliant Shrine in the Rotterdam, he had to care about his men from the Tower of Dusk. Moreover, he had wanted these 2 factions to serve as cannon fodder. Thus, he briefly consolidated his thought and called back the 7 pieces of debris of the stars. In a flash, this body was transported back to the sky of Alana. As the battlefield, Alana was almost torn into ruins now. Its prosperity and grandeur from before the battle were nowhere to be found. Other than the 2 battling parties, residents of all races scampered in all directions in fear. Innocent deaths were not few. Lin Li's return had undoubtedly raised the morale of the expedition. Even those from the Rotterdam now saw Lin Li as a savior. As for the High Elves, after they saw that Osric didn't come back, their morale dampened considerably, even though they couldn't believe that the High Lord would fail. As a sanctuary powerhouse, Lin Li's only true opponent was Osric. These High Elves at the peak of Legendary Realm didn't have any chance against Lin Li. With the addition of a sanctuary powerhouse, the battle ended quickly. These High Elves had managed to escape the war at the end of the Dark Age, but they didn't escape their fate of death. As the last High Elf was beheaded, the world was quiet again, and the expedition all collapsed onto the ground. After a moment of rest, Archbishop Martin struggled to come towards Lin Li, and asked, Master Philic, what do you wish to do with these remaining High Elves? According to the information, there were still other High Elves scattered around the world other than those they had killed in Alana. Managing colonies of slaves like this one, if time permitted, Lin Li wouldn't mind dealing with all of them so that he could free all the enslaved races in the world. However, the true Osric was still fighting for the Sky Castle's control now. Although Lin Li had the heart to do so, he couldn't afford to waste any more time here. Lin Li thought for a moment and looked at the condition of the expedition. He replied, rest here first. If any High Elf comes here when we are resting, then we'll deal with him. As for the rest, we can only decide later. Lin Li was very clear that Archbishop Martin had asked him this question because he wanted to get more followers. After all, the population in this world was considerable. According to that High Elf's memories, it had about half as many people as the Felon Kingdom. However, if Lin Li managed to gain control of the Sky Castle, this world would be his. Then, this could totally serve as a talent reserve base. Although humans and other races basically were now lacking in power because they had been ruled by the High Elves for a long time, there were definitely a few talents among millions of people. Although Lin Li had returned in time, The High Elves' magic legion was, after all, too overbearing, and the three forces had suffered damage of varying extent. The losses of the Rotterdam Kingdom should have been the greatest, as almost none of their alchemy colossuses was complete. Most of them had to undergo major repairs. In fact, there were even a few that could no longer be repaired. There were more than 10 holy light knights and priests who had been killed at the Brilliant Shrine's side. Almost all of them were injured, and a third of their members were severely wounded. The Tower of Dusk's team was not unscathed, either. There were also some mages who had been killed in action, and 4 of the Death Knights had their soul fire completely extinguished. Even Connorus had sustained a few wounds on his strong, perfect body. However, all in all, his strength was not affected much, and he was much stronger than the other two forces. That situation also made the other two forces feel particularly jealous, especially Donald of the Rotterdam Kingdom, who looked at the alchemy colossuses that had been destroyed. He then looked at the complete team of the Tower of Dusk, feeling an urge to cry. In particular, Lin Li did not look like he had suffered a loss, which made Donald feel disappointed. In Donald's opinion, Lin Li had to have been able to kill Osric while remaining unscathed because Osric was just too weak. If he had not changed his plan back then, or let the teams of the Tower of Dusk and Brilliant Shrine deal with the High Elves instead while he dealt with Osric, he would definitely have had an easier time now. Damn it, that staff in Osric's hand must be excellent magical equipment. Unfortunately, that guy Philip got it. If we were the ones to deal with Osric. Canber clearly had the same thoughts as Donald. He complained to Donald after going to him. Canber was still thinking about the staff in Osric's hand, but he didn't know that the so-called superior grade staff had long been reduced to ashes together with Osric using the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Your Highness, it's better to keep some things to yourself. The Tower of Dusk did not suffer much loss with their current power. On the other hand, almost all of our alchemy colossuses can no longer be used. Upon hearing Canber's complaints, Donald got a great shock as well, even though he thought the same. Although there were also mages and warriors in the Rotterdam Kingdom's team, the alchemy colossus was their greatest reliance. However, at this moment, going against the Tower of Dusk was clearly akin to courting death. Hearing Donald's reminder, Canber couldn't help but shiver. He turned to look at Lin Li and the team from the Tower of Dusk with some greed and resentment in his eyes, and he turned around to sit on the ground. After reminding Canber, Donald looked at the Tower of Dusk's team and began to get a little distracted. He could not think of how a quiet and unknown force like them could possess such terrifying strength. He was very clear that the Tower of Dusk had not got up to any sly or dirty tricks in the battle just now. In fact, they had taken down nearly half of the High Elves on their own. However, the result was that the Tower of Dusk had suffered the least damage. Although a few of their mages had also died in action, their losses were nothing compared to the team of the Rotterdam Kingdoms. Of course, Donald also knew that that did not mean that the Tower of Dusk was stronger than the team of the Rotterdam Kingdom. However, if the team of the Tower of Dusk were to attack them, they would have no means to retaliate at all. There were 3 or 4 legendary powerhouses in the Tower of Dusk's team. Connorus could even fight 2 legendary powerhouses on his own. Actually, judging from the situation when they first entered the Sky Castle, he reckoned that even if his alchemy colossuses were not damaged, it would probably be difficult for them to get any advantage over them. If they were close partners, it would obviously be better if the Tower of Dusk was stronger. However, the partnership between the Rotterdam Kingdom and the Tower of Dusk had clearly not reached that point yet. Donald couldn't help but be worried. If he found the target of the exploration this time, and Lin Li wanted to share too, it would be troublesome. The expedition rested for 3 days in Alana City. During those 3 days, they had killed some more High Elves that had arrived. However, everyone knew that those High Elves were by no means all of the remaining High Elves in this world. Besides, they also used those 3 days to search Osric's palace. They managed to find plenty of Osric's items from his collection. However, to Lin Li, who had explored Osric's mausoleum, the collection of the phony Osric was clearly inferior. Of course, to the others, the collection was enough to make up for their losses. After 3 days of rest and recuperation, the expedition had almost recovered its strength. The 3 parties discussed what to do next and decided to leave this world, especially under Lin Li's insistence. The exit of this world was in the depths of Osric's palace. It was actually the passage through which Osric placed a portion of his willpower back then. However, the exit could not be used by just anyone. Only those who had mastered the world laws would be able to open the exit. After resting for 3 days, Lin Li finally absorbed most of the information from the portion of Osric's willpower that he had devoured. After Lin Li finished chanting his incantation, a black vortex-shaped door slowly opened in the depths of the palace, and the expedition got into a defensive stance as they made their way through the door attentively. After passing through the gate, the crowd discovered that they were actually back in the central tower. However, they could tell from the surrounding decorations that it did not seem to be the same place that they had been in before entering the world. However, as the expedition was scanning their surroundings, there was a sudden roar filled with endless rage. The roar made everyone get chills in the depths of their souls. It was as if invisible fear had filled their souls. It's Osric. When Lin Li heard the roar, his first reaction was to think of the High Lord who was hiding somewhere. However, the aura accompanying that roar made Lin Li doubt his conjecture. When Lin Li had first explored the Sky Castle, he had had a brief contact with the ghost, and when he had explored Osric's mausoleum, he had another battle with the perfect body controlled by Osric. 3 days ago, he had fought hard with the phony High Lord, who had a portion of Osric's willpower, in the world created by the Immortal King. Lin Li was not particularly familiar with Osric's aura, but the aura accompanying that roar was unfamiliar to him. Connorus, did you sense anything? With those doubts in mind, Lin Li turned around to question Connorus. After all, Connorus' perfect body should have a more accurate sense of Osric's aura. However, when he heard Lin Li's question, Connorus couldn't help but shake his head. With a look of apprehension, he said, "Did that voice belong to Osric? Other than us and him, is there anything else that exists in this Sky Castle? It sounds like something happened at Osric's side. Otherwise, things wouldn't have become like this." That was the only conjecture Lin Li could make without any clues. At this moment, Archbishop Martin and Donald also went over and asked Lin Li about the source of that voice. Their hearts were still racing because of the previous battle, and the inexplicable roar of anger naturally made them particularly nervous. However, in the face of Archbishop Martin's and Donald's question, Lin Li could not give them a definitive answer at the moment, and could only reassure them a little so that they wouldn't be too nervous. Next, the expedition carefully searched the entire space on that floor, but they did not manage to find anything valuable. In the end, they arrived in front of a door. It was a door with a black vortex in the middle. Clearly, it would lead to a bizarre place again because there was no exit on the entire floor. Faced with this situation, the senior executives of the three forces did not talk much, and decided to enter the door to continue investigating. However, because of the previous reasons, everyone in the team knew about the danger in the Sky Castle, so they dared not belittle it at all. They knew that every step that they took in this Sky Castle would determine if they lived or died. The expedition regrouped. As usual, the Rotterdam Kingdom's alchemy colossuses were fighting in front. Everyone was on guard, and they stepped through the door with the black vortex. The moment they did, they felt as if they had been put through a teleportation portal as their surroundings became warped. However, when the scene behind the gate was presented before them, almost everyone's face instantly turned pale. What kind of a world is this? The skies are gray and there are grayish-white skeletons everywhere. The space is filled with intense death aura as well. Clearly, it was another space that was related to undead creatures. The oppressive feeling that the entire space brought to them was far beyond that of the space created by the Double Realm Psychic Towers. This is the Immortal King's laboratory. A portion of Osric's memory appeared in Lin Li's mind. He immediately thought of the background of the terrifying and oppressive place. When he had first explored the Sky Castle, Lin Li had visited the Immortal King's alchemy laboratory, only to realize that it had long been plundered by Osric, who had only left behind some not too valuable items as well as 20 alchemy puppets. The Immortal King used the undead creature laboratory for testing necromagic spells. In fact, it might be more appropriate to call it an experimental field rather than a laboratory. It was simply a world of the undead creatures, which looked similar to the previous world. There were just as many mountains, rivers, and thick forests, but there were endless undead creatures that almost occupied the entire world. After the expedition appeared, the undead creatures immediately got into an uproar as they surged towards the expedition endlessly like a flood. The ones in front were the skeletal warriors, which were surprisingly similar to the ones that had been strengthened by Gloomy Dark and the Scar of Death. Each of them had strength that was nearly level 10. However, the more terrifying thing was that the movements of the skeletal warriors were not as shaky as people remembered them. Each one resembled an actual human warrior, leaping and running about agilely. Based on that alone, the strength of those skeletal warriors should be enough to be increased further by a huge margin. Perhaps each skeletal warrior would be enough to deal with 10 ordinary skeletal warriors. Facing the wave of skeletal warriors, the expedition did not need to consider anything else at all. Their only option was to fight the skeletal warriors head-on. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team were in front. Normally, it would not take much energy for the alchemy colossuses to deal with skeletal warriors, as they would simply crush them with their feet. But that did not work here. Even though they crushed plenty of skeletal warriors and turned them into powder, most of the skeletal warriors managed to jump and climb up the large bodies of the alchemy colossuses thanks to their agility. Not long after the alchemy colossuses came in contact with the skeletal warriors, the large alchemy colossuses were covered with skeletal warriors crawling over them, making them turn into moving hills of skeletal warriors. Those with poor willpower might even throw up their dinner from the night before at this sight. Besides, after hanging off the alchemy colossuses, the skeletal warriors continuously slashed the alchemy colossus's outer shells with their swords. Damn it, are these still skeletal warriors? What was that immortal king researching? How did he create such a perverted thing? No one could calm down at the sight before them, but when they turned around, they discovered that that door had long vanished. The main reason that the skeletal warriors would become cannon fodder of the undead was that their movements were stiff and sluggish, and they had little to no offensive power. Even a farmer would be able to deal with a skeletal warrior alone as long as he could overcome his fear of undead creatures. However, those skeletal warriors were behaving far more outstandingly than elite human soldiers. They were like psychopaths. Even the skeletal warriors, which were the cannon fodder of the undead creatures, were incredibly outstanding. What would the undead creatures that were superior to the skeletal warriors be like here? At the thought of this question, everyone was dismayed. Although the team from the Brilliant Shrine was part of the expedition, and dealing with undead creatures was their forte, even Archbishop Martin couldn't help but put on a sullen expression when he thought about the time when they were dealing with the undead creatures summoned by the Double Realm Psychic Towers. There was a massive army of endless undead creatures that were all over the mountains and wilderness. They were definitely more numerous compared to the previous battle. Even if the undead creatures did not resist and allowed them to kill them, they probably would not even be able to finish killing all of them, not to mention that they were extremely powerful. Master Flick, what should we do next? Archbishop Martin asked Lin Li with an anxious face. Looking at the current situation, he knew that it was definitely worse than before. However, they could at least get by destroying the Double Realm Psychic Towers before, and there were no Double Realm Psychic Towers for them to destroy here. Did they really have to annihilate all the undead creatures? President Flick, didn't you use a magical weapon to kill the peak legendary level high elf in a moment previously? I don't know if it's still usable, but I believe that with that magical weapon, it shouldn't be too difficult to kill these undead creatures, even if we have to wipe all of them out. Donald seemed to be raising an idea, but in reality, he was trying to see through Lin Li. He wanted to know if that magical weapon could still be used, or what the consequence of using it was. However, Lin Li did not answer Donald's question. He simply looked at him, before saying to everyone, "No matter what we'll do next, get the team moving first. We can't stay trapped here, otherwise, the number of undead creatures will increase, and then the team will become unable to move an inch at all. Even if we can come up with a solution, we won't be able to put it to use if that happens. Use all the items that you can now. Even if we leave, where can we go? What if we get further and further away when the time comes?" Canberra was clearly displeased about the fact that Lin Li did not answer Donald's question. However, he also knew that he could not make it too obvious. However, Lin Li did not bother with Canberra's complaints at all. Instead, he turned to look at Archbishop Martin. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Archbishop Martin had already started following Lin Li's instructions. After all, Lin Li was the son of the Holy Light, who could cast the Judgment Day spell. In terms of status, he was superior to Archbishop Martin. Hence, as soon as he saw Lin Li looking over, Archbishop Martin immediately understood, and did not question Lin Li's decision anymore. He turned to look at the Brilliant Shrines team, and gave them instructions. Donald did not understand anything about the son of the Holy Light. Hence, he was incredibly astonished to see that Archbishop Martin had agreed so readily. He frantically asked, "Archbishop Martin, are you agreeing to his arrangements without asking any further questions?" Although the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom were extremely narcissistic, and looked down on people and forces outside the Rotterdam Kingdom, Donald knew that the Brilliant Shrine was one of the top forces of the world. As one of the 4 archbishops of the Brilliant Shrine, Archbishop Martin was second only to Pope Rosario, and was a respected figure. How could he comply and follow the instructions of the leader of a small force? Master Donald, think about it. So far, has Master Flick made any wrong decisions? Don't go on further. If you're willing, just follow Master Flick's instructions. Archbishop Martin did not explain any further, and simply expressed his trust in Lin Li. After hearing Archbishop Martin's words, Donald was left with no other choice. Archbishop Martin's attitude made it clear that Donald could choose to either go along with it, or part ways with them. Under such circumstances, no matter what trump cards the Tower of Dusk might have, leaving the team of the Brilliant Shrine, which was the best at dealing with undead creatures, meant that they would probably be drowned by the undead creatures in no time. Hence, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom stayed in front, while the Holy Light Knights of the Brilliant Shrine protected the team on the flanks. The mages of the Tower of Dusk conducted a remote wipeout, while the Death Knights guarded the back. The expedition was like a boat in a thunderstorm, struggling to trudge forward amidst the tide of undead creatures. However, Just like what they were worried about, fireballs emerged from the depths of the army of undead creatures when the team was slowly advancing, blasting at the army of undead creatures. Although the fireballs were not extremely powerful and could not cause substantial damage to the expedition, all their enemies were undead creatures. Even if there were undead creatures that could cast magic, they should be casting necromagic spells. How could elemental magic appear? However, they soon discovered that there were not only fireballs, but also wind blades, ice spears, and ground spikes. Although they were all beginner-level magic spells, they were associated with the undead creatures there, which gave them chills. The undead creatures actually knew how to cast elemental magic spells. Could that be a result of the Immortal King's research? In that case, how sick would the higher-level undead creatures there be? After killing batch after batch of skeletal warriors, the expedition finally saw the undead creatures that could cast beginner-level elemental magic spells. They were a group of hellghouls that varied in color. Like the skeletal warriors, the hellghouls were also cannon fodder among undead creatures. However, they often ranked above the skeletal warriors because they were ranged attackers. The ability of the average hellghoul was initially just casting hellfire bombs. That was also a type of beginner-level necromagic spell. However, those colorful hellghouls were casting all sorts of beginner-level elemental magic spells. Upon seeing that, the people in the expedition couldn't help but think, the hellghouls are already casting all sorts of beginner-level elemental magic spells. Will the skeletal mages cast mid to high-level elemental magic? It was soon proven that they had made the correct guess, even though it was not a good thing for them. The fact that the undead creatures could cast elemental magic spells meant that holy light magic no longer had the additional effect that it originally had in terms of defense, like when facing necromagic. Initially, holy light magic would at least have a restraining effect on the undead creatures because of its purifying effect. However, not only did they lose their original advantage, they in turn had to be restrained by the undead creatures. In the magic system of Anril, there was a rather crude law that holy light magic would restrain necromagic, which restrained elemental magic, yet elemental magic restrained holy light magic. Of course, the restraint was affected by many other factors, and it was not necessarily absolutely accurate. However, according to the verification of many magic scholars, the law was true even though it was not that obvious at times. However, the expedition was now facing a massive number of undead creatures that could almost be considered endless. The elemental magic cast by tens of thousands of undead creatures would definitely pose a threat to the expedition even if they were only low-level elemental magic spells, which could not be ignored. The only thing to be thankful for might be that the damage that the holy light magic caused to the undead creatures did not seem to be reduced because of the elemental magic. Hence, facing such a situation, the expedition quickly changed their tactic. A portion of the mages joined the defense, and the priests became the main ranged attackers. The tactical change had worked a little, but the undead creatures that the expedition was facing were simply too numerous. They could not kill all of them at all. Under the siege of the army of undead creatures, the expedition couldn't but slow down in their advance. They went from taking a step every minute to taking a step every 10 minutes. These undead creatures can't be killed at all. How much longer are we going to keep killing them? The people from the Rotterdam Kingdom's team panicked. After all, the alchemy colossuses were in front. Although the alchemy colossuses' defense meant they would not be destroyed by the undead creatures that quickly, they consumed a huge amount of power with each step that they took forward, as if they were pushing a mountain. It had been half an hour since they entered this world, but they only managed to cover a short distance. However, the alchemy colossuses required swapping their power magical crystals. The alchemy colossuses were massive constructs that seemed oppressive and had powerful defensive and offensive power. However, if they did not have any energy, they would just be piles of scrap metal. Fortunately, during their previous exploration, the team from the Rotterdam Kingdom had also gotten plenty of magical crystals. Otherwise, their alchemy colossuses would have all been crippled in the previous world. However, even with the large number of magical crystals that they had obtained, there would still be a time when they ran out of them, especially now that they could not see the possibility of getting out of this predicament. No one knew how long they would have to fight in this world with the infinite army of undead creatures. Even if they possessed more magical crystals, they would have to use them sparingly. After all, they knew that their value lay in the alchemy colossuses. If they did not have the alchemy colossuses, the other two teams would immediately abandon them. Master Flick, we really can't go on like this, Archbishop Martin said worriedly, when he walked to Lin Li's side. After all, the cooperation between the Tower of Dusk and the Rotterdam Kingdom happened because of him. Hence, now that the two forces were clearly not going to deal with it, he could only be the bridge of the communication now. Lin Li still respected Archbishop Martin quite a lot. Hence, after hearing the question, he pointed at the front of the team. He said, Archbishop Martin, do Do you see that place shrouded in a shadow? According to the movement direction of the undead creatures, it's likely that that might be the source of the undead creatures. Since this world is the Immortal King's undead laboratory, that place might be the key to how we get out of here. What? Go to the source of the undead creatures. Don't you think there are enough undead creatures already? Before Archbishop Martin could say anything, Canber from the Rotterdam Kingdom had already begun yelling. Indeed, according to the thought process of ordinary people, one would naturally have to leave towards the periphery of the undead creatures in order to break free from the siege of the undead creatures. If they were to head towards the source of the undead creatures, it would be the same as sending themselves to the lion's den. They would only end up sinking further and further into the army of undead creatures. However, as Lin Li said, that was the place where the Immortal King would experiment with necromagic. Besides, it was very likely that the undead creatures had been created by the Immortal King. Hence, the same place where the Immortal King would experiment with necromagic should be the origin of the undead creatures. That was the only place where they could find the information left behind by the Immortal King, which would most likely contain some tips for leaving this world. Archbishop Martin did not have any doubts at all about Lin Li's decision. Just like before, regardless of how reluctant the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom were, they could not leave on their own anyway. They could only accompany the rest obediently as if they had been kidnapped and held captive on a boat. In reality, although Donald and Canber were displeased, feeling like they had been kidnapped, they carefully thought about Lin Li's opinion, and knew that that was indeed the only way out for the expedition given the current situation. After all, staying put at the same spot and preserving the status quo might seem safer, but they would have no hope of leaving this place. Was it really possible to kill all the endless undead creatures? Hence, Canber and Donald were not really bent on opposing. Anyway, they were all now tied to the same rope with the rest. If they were going to die, they would die together. However, due to their arrogance, the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom were not willing to follow the commands of an unknown, insignificant figure. Fortunately, Archbishop Martin was acting as a middleman. He was advanced in age and could be considered old and cunning. He managed to give the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom an out without causing more tension. The expedition was painstakingly advancing towards the source of the undead creatures like a small boat that was traveling against the tide. Not only were they extremely slow, they also looked like they were about to be overturned by a wave at any moment. The expedition consisted of the elites of the three forces, which dominated Anral. However, the ones who brought them trouble were just skeletal warriors, skeletal mages, and other low-level undead creatures. There was one thing about the strange and unusual undead creatures that was the same as what everyone remembered, and that was that they were unafraid of death. They did not know what death was at all. However, that was not a good thing for the expedition. Being fearless of death, coupled with their flexibility and various special abilities, meant the resistance that the undead creatures mounted against the expedition was truly incomparable to what the undead creatures summoned by the Double Realm Psychic Towers had amounted to. The members of the expedition could totally imagine how the undead creatures would sweep across Anral tyrannically and cause it to sink into infinite darkness. At the thought of it, everyone in the expedition couldn't help but shiver. They also couldn't help but have a doubt in mind. What did the Immortal King create so many undead creatures for? Did he plan to attack Anral? After all, legend had it that the Immortal King merely disappeared, and there was no evidence to prove his downfall. People had even associated the god of mages Garesco's departure with the Immortal King. They said that Garesco had probably left Anral to hunt down the Immortal King in the endless chaos of time and space. There were remnants of the High Elves in that world, which the High Elves claimed was their last refuge, as well as the Immortal King's proud disciple Osric. There was a massive army of undead creatures in that world that was enough to dominate Anral. If those two matters were linked together, they definitely had to worry about just what the Immortal King was thinking. Of course, the expedition was not worried for long. After all, their survival was uncertain. What they should really consider now was how they should preserve their lives. Although their capability was one of the reasons that the expedition could survive until now, the most important reason was that there was a smaller surface area of contact between them and the army of undead creatures. No matter how many undead creatures there were, they would not be able to attack the expedition at the same time. They would only be in touch with the area surrounding the team. Besides, the skeletal mages that were attacking from afar were still using low-level magic spells. After all, they could not really pose a threat to the expedition. However, as the expedition advanced towards the source of the undead creatures, they would have to face the reality, which they could not escape. The skeletal warriors, Helghulls, and skeletal mages might be incredibly strong, but they were still only cannon fodder level existences among the undead creatures at the end of the day. If the expedition continued to stay in the periphery of the world for a long period of time, they would basically face the siege of the skeletal warriors, Helghulls, and skeletal mages. However, Now that the expedition was going in the opposite direction of what would be deemed logical, it meant that they were approaching the high-level undead creatures behind the skeletal warriors, since they were moving closer to the source. Although the expedition was advancing rather slow under the huge resistance, they were still continuously moving forward, after all. Besides, due to the fact that everyone all had some hopes about Lin Li's suggestion, they went all out and advanced faster. Initially, the higher-level undead creatures would not be bothered to intervene unless the cannon fodder-level undead creatures were destroyed to a certain extent. However, the expedition was sending themselves to the undead creatures by doing so. At first, the people of the expedition could only see skeletal warriors and other low-level undead creatures when they looked over. Hence, no one thought about it that way. Lin Li had long thought of that, but he did not tell the others about it, lest they got too frightened and stopped instead of moving forward. When the expedition continuously advanced to the source of the tide of undead creatures, leaving their original location, and reached a distance of about 1 kilometer away, hordes of vampires appeared, that finally reminded them that there were more than just skeletal warriors there. In fact, even the vampires were only mid-level undead creatures. The liches which mastered the power of death and humorous worms were the strongest. The vampires that flew over from afar were covering the sky like gray clouds. There were probably up to 10,000 of them. The flapping of their wings sounded in unison, and seemed to cover up all other sounds in the world. They were so terrifying that everyone got chills. Damn it, why are there so many vampires? The people of the expedition could not help but cry out as they looked at the approaching dark clouds. Even the elites who had been through strict and tough training looked rather helpless. The vampires were not something that the skeletal warriors could compare to. Generally speaking, skeletal warriors could only reach level 5, and with their stiff and sluggish movements, as well as their silliness, even a farmer who did not know any combat techniques would be able to fight one of them alone if he were brave enough, and did not have any health issues. Although the skeletal warriors in this world had grown far more capable than everyone had imagined under the nurturing of the immortal king, everyone found them to be tough to deal with because their actions were almost as flexible as normal people's. In reality, their highest level was just level 10, and most of them were about level 7 or level 8. Level 10 could be considered the limit of the skeletal warriors. After all, they were just skeletons which did not know how to cast magic. No matter how they grew, it was impossible for them to break through level 10. However, as mid-level undead creatures, the weakest of vampires were at least level 10, and could reach up to the peak of the level 15. Although they were restrained by their bloodline, and would not go beyond level 15, where were they now? The immortal king might have tampered with their bodies. Even the skeletal warriors that originally could only reach level 5, had already reached level 10. How could they treat the vampires normally? Although not all vampires were as lucky as Norfaler, who could consume the fresh blood of a wyrm, the green dragons, and the ice blast wyrm Sindera. The immortal king was an impeccable character, who could even create a world. How could he not be able to resolve such a small issue? More importantly, the strength of vampires was not something that could simply be measured by level. The vampires were known as born assassins, and one of the most important reasons for that was their speed that was truly like lightning. Besides, while having such incredible speed, they also had astonishing strength and power. They could tear apart strong and solid steel armor with just their sharp claws.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.